My name is Iris T. Main, and last night on my 18th birthday, my father leaned close and whispered something that changed everything. He smiled like it was nothing. Like he was asking me to pass the salt. Then he said, "When this is over, you're going to sign some papers for Uncle Wade, just a formality." I smiled back, I nodded. Then I walked into the kitchen, opened my laptop, and quietly transferred every dollar my grandparents had protected for me, every cent tied to the cabin, the savings, the investments, into the legal control structure they had prepared years ago. By the next morning, the truth hit my family like a landslide. The cabin, the money, the investment account, all of it was locked behind an irrevocable trust they could not touch. My father went pale. My uncle, who had already signed a deal to sell property he didn't legally own, started calling lawyers before breakfast. And before I tell you what happened next, take a second to like this video, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from. I always love seeing the cities and time zones you're tuning in from. Now let me take you back 6 years, because this story didn't start at my birthday party. It started at Cedar Lake, the summer I turned 12, when my grandfather said something I didn't understand until last night. 6 years earlier, the summer I turned 12, my grandfather, Harold T. Main, picked me up in his old truck every Saturday morning and drove me 40 minutes out to Cedar Lake. The cabin sat back from the water behind a wall of white pines so tall they swallowed the afternoon sun. The porch sagged a little on the left side. The screen door never shut right. The place smelled like wood smoke, old paperbacks, lake water, and something sweet I could never quite name. "Grab the other end," Grandpa would say, lifting a fence rail onto his shoulder. And I did. We spent that whole summer fixing things. Not glamorous things, real things: fence posts, window latches, leaky pipes, loose steps, roof moss, rusted hinges. Grandpa never rushed me. He taught me how to press my thumb into a board to test for rot. If the wood gave under pressure, it was done. He showed me how to listen to the radiator, how to bleed trapped air from the lines, how to tell when a patch job would hold and when it was just hiding a bigger problem. Inside, Grandma Vivian always had lunch waiting, iced tea sweating on the kitchen table, sandwiches cut diagonally, napkins folded neatly beside each plate. She liked small details. She said a home should feel like someone expected you. That kitchen table was one of Grandpa's proudest things. He had built it himself the year they got married. Even as a kid, I could tell it mattered to him. The edges were worn smooth by decades of hands and dishes and elbows and quiet conversations. One evening, after we'd spent the day replacing 3 fence posts on the south side of the property, I came out to the porch and found Grandma reading in the wicker chair by the railing. She patted the seat beside her. We sat there together and watched the lake change color as the sun went down, gold first, then copper, then blue-gray. That was when Grandpa stepped out, wiping sawdust from his hands, and said something that didn't make sense to me then. He looked at the water and said, "This cabin stays in the family." But family isn't always blood, Iris. Family is who shows up. I was 12. I thought he was just being poetic. He was. That summer, I went back every weekend. By October, I knew which window in the back bedroom stuck in damp weather. I knew where the water heater seeped. I knew how to reset the breaker in the laundry room when the microwave and toaster ran at the same time. Grandma taught me how to organize the bookshelves by color because, as she put it, it makes the room feel warmer in winter. Grandpa showed me the property line markers too, old iron stakes he had driven into the ground himself years earlier. I didn't know it then, but by that point my grandparents were already talking to a lawyer. About the cabin, about the money, about me. Home never felt like Cedar Lake back in Ridgemont. Our house was fine. That's the best word for it. Not terrible, not loving, just fine. 3 bedrooms, small yard. A garage my father used as an office for his building supply business. Beige walls, functional furniture, everything in its place, but nothing that felt warm. My younger sister, Kelsey, was 10, and she had the bigger bedroom. It had been redone the year before, lavender walls, A new desk, matching curtains, a lamp that probably cost more than everything on my bookshelf put together. My room still had the old carpet from the previous owners. At dinner one night, my father, Greg T. Main, brought up the cabin while cutting into his steak. "Dad's place is just sitting there losing value," he said. "Property taxes alone are ridiculous. We should sell it and reinvest." My mother, Denise, nodded like this was obvious. "Makes sense." I looked up. "Grandpa said the cabin stays in the family." Dad laughed, not a mean laugh, worse, a dismissive one. "You were 12, Iris, he was being nice." That was the end of it. Nobody asked what I thought. Nobody asked what Grandpa had meant. Nobody asked anything at all. The conversation moved on to Kelsey's debate trophy. Regional finalist. Very impressive. Mom had already framed the certificate. I had won the district science fair 2 weeks earlier. The ribbon was still in my backpack. After dinner, while I was clearing plates, I noticed something half hidden under a grocery list on the counter. A glossy flyer. RIDGLINE development lakefront lots, premium prices paid now. There was a handwritten phone number scribbled in the corner. I didn't recognize the handwriting. Not my dad's, not my mom's. I put the flyer back exactly where I found it. Then I went upstairs and sat on my bed thinking about my grandparents' kitchen table, the one Grandpa built with his own hands. The one where Grandma always knew what I wanted without asking. Downstairs, someone was already measuring that home in dollar signs. The funeral's Grandpa died 2 years later. I was 14. The funeral was on a Tuesday under a gray sky that threatened rain all morning. The folding chairs sank into the wet grass. My shoes came home muddy. I sat in the second row clutching Grandpa's blue plaid handkerchief, the one he always kept in his back pocket. It still smelled faintly like pine. At the reception afterward, I saw Dad and his brother, Wade, standing by the dessert table with their heads close together. Wade had a folder tucked under his arm. They weren't grieving. They were discussing something. Then I heard Wade say, quietly, "We should move on this before probate gets complicated." They were talking about the cabin at my grandfather's funeral. I said nothing. I was 14. I had no voice, no power, and no idea that Grandpa had already planned for exactly that moment. 2 years later, Grandma got sick. She declined fast. In March, she was tired. In April, she was thinner. By June, she was gone. The last time I visited her, she held my hand with surprising strength and whispered, "The cabin is yours, Iris. Don't let them take it. Promise me." I promised. After her funeral, I heard Dad say something at our kitchen table that I will never forget. "Now we can finally sort out the property." He said it with relief. Like something inconvenient had been cleared away. That night, I heard him in the garage talking to Wade on the phone. "Yeah," Dad said, pacing. "I agree. Let's get it moving." That was the moment something in me changed. My grandmother's death felt like a loss to me. To them, it felt like clearance. I didn't cry that night. Instead, I made a decision. I just didn't know how I was going to act on it yet. The cabin became my quiet rebellion from 16 until just before I turned 18. The cabin became my refuge. Every Saturday morning, I drove out to Cedar Lake in a used Honda I bought with babysitting money and weekend jobs. I repaired the porch screen. I replaced weather stripping on the back door. I cleared pine needles from the roof because Grandpa had taught me that's how leaks start. I oiled the hinges. I cleaned out gutters. I dusted bookshelves. I kept the place alive. At home, the language changed. It stopped being Grandpa's cabin, then it became the family property. Dad said that phrase like it had always been true. Wade started coming over more often too. Every other Sunday, usually with a manila folder, sometimes with a laptop, sometimes with both. One night at dinner I tried. "What about Grandma's wish?" I asked. "She wanted me to keep it." Mom put down her fork with that calm, controlled expression she used right before correcting someone. "Your grandmother was emotional at the end, sweetie." This is business. Business. That was the word they used for everything that used to be love. By the time I was 17, Dad stopped pretending. "When you turn 18, he said one night, "we'll figure this out as a family." The way he said asterisk asterisk family asterisk asterisk, I knew exactly what he meant. My way. The card in the closet one cold November afternoon. I was at the cabin cleaning out the hall closet. Behind a stack of old quilts, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it in Grandma Vivian's handwriting. Inside was a single business card. Margaret Caldwell, attorney at Law Main Family Trust. My hands started shaking. Not from fear, from recognition. Grandma had left that there for me to find. Not for Dad, not for Wade, for me. Because she knew exactly who would be the one cleaning closets and folding quilts and making sure nothing important got thrown away. I slipped the card into my wallet. I didn't call right away. I didn't have to. 3 months before my 18th birthday, Margaret Caldwell called me first. The lawyer. It was a Thursday evening in February. I was doing calculus homework when my phone lit up with an unknown local number. Iris, this is Margaret Caldwell. I was your grandparents' attorney. We need to speak before your birthday. There are things you need to know, and there isn't much time. I met her downtown that Saturday. Margaret was in her late 50s, silver-haired, precise, and calm in the way only experienced lawyers seem to be. Her office smelled like coffee, paper, and old filing cabinets. She opened a folder and got straight to the point. Your grandparents hired me 6 years ago, she said. They established an irrevocable trust containing the cabin, a savings account, and an investment portfolio. Total current value is approximately $2.1 million. You are the sole beneficiary. I remember gripping the arms of the chair. Everything in the room felt suddenly sharper. My grandparents had left me everything, not through a will. Not through probate, not in a way Dad and Wade could intercept. They had transferred it all into the trust while they were alive. Legally, it was never part of their estate after that. Which meant my father and uncle had no rightful claim. Margaret slid a summary across the desk. There it was, my name, second line, beneficiary. The cabin title was recorded under the trust 6 years ago, she said. At the county recorder's office. Your father doesn't know that. I looked up. Why didn't they tell him? Margaret paused. Then she said, because your grandfather told me, and I'm quoting him here, my sons will sell that cabin before the funeral flowers wilt. I sat there staring at the paper. And suddenly, every weird conversation, every flyer, every whispered phone call made sense. Then Margaret added one more thing. Someone has been making recent inquiries at the county recorder's office about the cabin title. That was when I stopped feeling confused and started paying attention. The plan to steal what was never theirs. The next Sunday, Wade came to dinner. Afterward, he and Dad went into the garage. The door stayed cracked open just enough for voices to slip through. Wade spoke first. I already signed the purchase agreement with Ridgeline, $450, but we need the title clean before closing. Dad asked, how do we get it clean? Wade answered immediately like he'd already rehearsed it. Quitclaim deed. Dad's gone, Mom's gone, we're the legal heirs. We transfer it, record it, and sell. Dad hesitated. Is that legal? It's standard, Wade said. Nobody's going to question it. Then came the part I'll never forget. Dad asked quietly, what about Iris? Wade didn't even pause. She's 17. She can't do anything. And by the time she's 18, the sale will already be moving. She'll be upset, sure, but she'll get over it. We'll give her a cut. Dad said, how much? 50 grand. For college, she should be grateful. I stepped back from the garage door with my hands turning cold. Wade had already signed a purchase agreement to sell a property he did not own. For $450,000, he had promised land held in a trust he didn't even know existed. That night, I texted Margaret 2 words, they're accelerating. She replied 3 minutes later, I expected that. Come in Saturday, we'll prepare everything. How my grandparents protected me on Saturday, Margaret laid it all out like a battle map. The title is already under the trust, she said. If Wade tries to file a quitclaim deed, the recorder should reject it because the chain of title won't match. But if he files false supporting documents or tries to create confusion, it could still cloud the title and drag this into litigation. I asked the only question that mattered. So I have to act first, she tapped the calendar. You have to act on time. The moment you turn 18, you become legally able to formally accept your role under the trust. Once that happens, I can file a lease pendens first thing the next morning. Public notice of a protected legal interest. That will freeze the title against any fraudulent transfer attempts. I nodded slowly. What do I have to do? Show up, sign. I'll handle the rest. I sat there quietly for a long moment, then asked, should I tell my parents? Margaret took off her glasses and looked me dead in the eye. Your grandfather did not ask me to negotiate with them, Iris. He asked me to protect you. When I got home, Dad was in the kitchen grinning. Good news, kiddo, I'm throwing you a birthday party. Whole family, Saturday night, big one, 18. Mom smiled too, even Kelsey clapped, and I smiled back, because my father was planning my birthday party. My uncle was planning to steal my grandmother's cabin, and in 9 days, I was going to let them believe everything was moving exactly according to their plan. 5 days before my birthday, 5 days before I turned 18, my mom sat down beside me on the couch with her carefully practiced, let's talk like adults voice. Now that you're almost 18, she said, there are some family decisions we should make together. Together. That word felt fake the second it hit the air. She went on. The cabin costs money. Taxes, insurance, repairs. Your dad's business has been struggling. If we sell it, we can pay off debt and set up a college fund for both you and Kelsey. I looked at her. Grandma wanted me to keep it. For just a second, something impatient flashed across her face before she smoothed it away. Your grandmother was sentimental, Iris. Sentiment doesn't pay property taxes. As if on cue, Dad walked in. I've already talked to a buyer, he said. Good price, fair deal. What company? I asked. He blinked. A development company. What company? Longer pause. Ridgeline something, they're reputable. I nodded once. I'll think about it. Dad patted my shoulder. That's my girl. He walked away smiling like he'd just closed a deal. Later that night, Kelsey knocked on my bedroom door in her pajamas. She sat on the edge of my bed and picked at a loose thread in the blanket. Mom and Dad keep talking about the cabin after I'm supposed to be asleep, she said. They sound weird. Weird how? Like excited, but also nervous. Then she looked at me. Is something going on? I pulled the blanket over her feet. Don't worry about it, Kels. She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. And I knew then that even though I was the target, she was being dragged through it too. 3 days before my birthday, Uncle Wade showed up unannounced. That alone told me everything. Wade was a real estate agent. Nothing he did was accidental. He caught me in the driveway as I got back from the grocery store. Big smile, casual clothes, leaning against his car like we were just having a friendly chat. Hey, kiddo. Got a minute? We sat on the front steps. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice all charm. Here's the thing, Iris, that lake lot alone is worth $450. I can get us a clean, fast close with a buyer I trust. And what do I get? I asked. $50,000 cash for college. I let that sit there between us. Then I said, 50 out of 450. He smiled like I was adorable. You're 18, Iris. 50 grand is a lot of money for someone your age. Most kids would jump at that. I looked right at him. Whose name is on the deed, Uncle Wade? That smile froze for half a second, just long enough. Then it came back. Your grandparents, but they're gone now, so it passes to your dad and me as next of kin. That's not how it works. He should have known that. He sold houses for a living. But he was counting on me not knowing it. I'll think about it, I said again. He stood and brushed his hands on his jeans. Don't overthink this one, Iris. Opportunities like this don't wait. He got in his car and drove off. Before he reached the end of the street, he was already on the phone. That night, I texted Margaret again. They're accelerating. She answered almost immediately. Stay the course. 3 more days, 3 more days. I could do 3 more days. The night before I turned 18, the night before my birthday, I drove to the cabin alone. Cedar Lake was flat and dark beneath a half moon. The pine trees stood black against the sky like cutouts. I parked in the gravel patch Grandpa had leveled himself years ago and walked up to the porch. The second step still creaked. I sat in the chair beside the one that used to be his. The air smelled like rain and pine resin. Margaret had emailed me the full document package earlier that evening. Trust acknowledgement. Beneficiary acceptance. Protective filing instructions. Signature tabs marked and ready. At midnight, I read every page twice. Then I closed my laptop and listened to the lake. Grandpa used to say, "Patience isn't weakness, Iris. It's timing." I used to think he meant fishing. That night I understood he meant survival. And then, without warning, I cried. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just quietly. I cried because I wished my father had been the kind of man who would have taken me fishing there instead of calculating resale value. I cried because I wished my mother had asked me what I wanted instead of telling me what was practical. I cried because I hated that I had to sign legal documents at midnight to protect myself from the people who were supposed to protect me. But wishes don't hold up in court. Signed papers do. So I wiped my face, locked the cabin, drove home, lay down in bed, and set my alarm for 11:45 p.m. In 6 hours, I would turn 18. In 7, my family's plan would start collapsing. Midnight at 11:50 p.m., my bedroom door was shut and the house was quiet. Dad and Mom had gone to bed. Kelsey's light had been off for hours. I opened my laptop and joined a private video call. Margaret appeared on screen from her home office, wearing reading glasses and holding a stack of papers under a desk lamp. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. When the clock turned midnight, she guided me through the signing. Line by line, page by page, no drama, just law. I signed the acceptance documents that formally activated my legal standing as beneficiary under the trust and confirmed Margaret's authority to record notice protecting the property. From that moment on, the assets my grandparents had shielded were no longer vulnerable to whatever Wade and Dad thought they were going to do. Margaret looked at me and said quietly, "This isn't a trick, Iris. This is your grandfather's last gift. You just had to be old enough to receive it." I looked at the signature on the page. My name, in ink. The clock read 12:03 a.m. I was 18. And downstairs, in someone's folder or printer tray or fantasy of easy money, my uncle's fraudulent paperwork was already dead. He just didn't know it yet. What Wade was doing that same night, I didn't know this until later, but while I was upstairs signing the documents that protected the trust, Wade was in the kitchen of his rented duplex printing forms. A quitclaim deed, a fake notary stamp, and a purchase agreement with Ridgeline Development for $450,000. The deal was already signed. 30-day closing window. Penalty clause if he failed to deliver clean title. $45,000 plus damages. He had made that deal 2 months earlier, before verifying title, before confirming ownership, before doing the most basic due diligence a real estate agent is supposed to do. He had bet nearly $500,000 on property he assumed would fall into his hands. He assumed no one had planned against him. He was wrong. The birthday party the next afternoon. My birthday party started at 4. The living room was full. Neighbors, family friends, church people, 2 of Dad's old business contacts, Kelsey's best friend's parents. There were silver balloons, a grocery store sheet cake, and a banner that said Happy 18th in crooked metallic letters. I smiled. I thanked people. I opened small gifts, a journal, a picture frame. A gift card, folded neatly in my jacket pocket, was the signed document from midnight. I never touched it. I didn't need to. It had already done its job. At one point, Dad stood near the cake and tapped his glass. "I just want to say," he announced, "Iris is officially an adult today, and Denise and I are so proud of her." People smiled. A few clapped, then Dad looked at me and added, "And as a family, we've got some exciting plans for the future. Right, Iris?" Every face turned toward me. "Thanks, Dad," I said, nothing more. He held the smile a beat too long, then laughed and raised his glass like I'd played along. But from the corner of my eye, I saw Wade by the front door checking his phone and typing furiously. Then Nora Beckett, my grandparents' neighbor from the lake, caught my arm near the window. She leaned close and said quietly, "Your grandmother would want you to know this. I saw your uncle at the cabin last week with two men in suits. They were measuring the lot line. He had brought buyers to a property he didn't own. That was how certain he'd been. After cake, Dad stood up again. This time his tone was louder, more performative. As some of you know, our family's been under financial pressure," he said. "But Harold and Vivian left us something important, the cabin at Cedar Lake. And as a family, we've decided to sell it to secure everyone's future. We've decided." He said it in front of 20 people like it was settled. Then he looked right at me. "Iris understands. She knows this is what's best for all of us. Right, sweetheart?" The room went still. Mom smiled tightly. "It's what responsible families do," she added. "We sacrifice for each other." I set my fork down on my plate. The little clink it made sounded louder than it should have. Then I said, clearly, "I never agreed to sell the cabin." Dad's smile didn't fall, but it changed. "She's joking," he said. "Birthday nerves." "I'm not joking." Wade stepped forward from the doorway. "Come on, Iris. This isn't the time or place." I picked up my glass of water, took a sip, and looked directly at him. "You're right, Uncle Wade, this isn't the time." I held his gaze. The time was 8:00 a.m. This morning, silence. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't check it. He didn't need to. Some part of him already knew. After the guests left, people started leaving after that. Fast. Polite smiles. Awkward goodbyes. That careful, uncomfortable energy people have when they can feel a family disaster unfolding and want no part of the splash zone. Within half an hour, the house was mostly empty. Then Mom turned on me in the kitchen. "Do you have any idea what your father is going through?" she snapped. "He could lose this house, Iris. And you're clinging to a cabin you only use on weekends." "I go there every weekend." "That's not the point." She pressed both hands to the counter. "We are a family. Families make decisions together. If you loved this family, you wouldn't need a lawyer to tell you what to do." I stared at her. "How do you know about a lawyer?" She didn't flinch. "Wade found the business card in your bag last week. Margaret Caldwell, who is she?" My stomach dropped, not because I was afraid, because I realized they had gone through my things. Before I could respond, Nora's voice came from the kitchen doorway. "That girl has every right to talk to a lawyer, Denise. Vivian would have wanted that." Mom turned sharply. "This is a family matter, Nora." Nora didn't move. "Vivian was my friend for 40 years, she said. I think I know what she wanted." That silence could have shattered glass. After Nora left and the last neighbors slipped out, it was just us. Dad, Mom, Wade, Kelsey, me. Dad sat at the table and folded his hands like he was chairing a meeting. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "Tomorrow morning, Wade and I go to the county office. We file the paperwork, the cabin sells, you get a fair share. And we move on as a family. What's my fair share? 50,000. Out of how much?" He didn't answer. Wade did. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I looked at Dad. "And if I say no," his jaw locked. "If you fight this, you're on your own, no help with college. No living under this roof." The kitchen went quiet. The faucet dripped once. "You're threatening to kick me out on my 18th birthday. I'm asking you to be part of this family." I stood up. My hands were shaking, but my voice was, "I am part of this family, Dad. I'm the part that keeps promises." Then I walked upstairs and shut my door. He thought his deadline was 9:00 a.m. At the county recorder's office. He didn't know mine had been midnight, and Margaret's had been 8:00 a.m. At exactly 8:00 the next morning, the county recorder's office opened. Fluorescent lights hummed awake. A clerk in a blue cardigan unlocked the counter. Margaret Caldwell walked in first carrying a leather folder. She presented certified trust documents and a lease pendens, formal notice of a protected legal interest tied to the Cedar Lake property. The clerk checked the parcel number, checked the chain of title, and recorded it. Done. From that moment on, anyone who touched that title would see the truth. T. Main Family Irrevocable Trust, Margaret Caldwell, Trustee Iris T. Main, sole beneficiary at 14, Margaret called me. It's done, she said. The property is protected. Anything they try to file now will be rejected. I was sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal while Mom made coffee upstairs and Dad got dressed for what he still thought was a victory lap. At 8:30, Dad and Wade came downstairs together. Dad wore his old business shirt, the one he used to wear to bank meetings. Wade carried the same folder. "We'll be back by lunch," Dad said. I looked up from my cereal and said, "Good luck." He paused for half a second, studying my face. Then he left. 9:05 a.m., the recorder's office. Margaret stayed on purpose. She wanted to see what happened. At 9:05, Wade stepped up to the counter and slid his quitclaim deed across with the confidence of a man expecting routine paperwork. Dad stood behind him with his hands in his pockets. The clerk typed in the parcel number. Then she stopped, looked closer, typed again, and said, "I'm sorry, sir. I can't record this document." Wade leaned in. "Excuse me. The property is titled under the T-Main Family Irrevocable Trust, recorded in 2020. There is also a lease pendens filed this morning. Your document does not match the current ownership record." Wade's face went blank. "That's impossible." The clerk stayed calm. "The chain of title is clear, sir. This quitclaim does not correspond to the legal owner." Dad stepped forward. "There is no trust. Our parents own that property." The clerk looked between them. "Then I suggest you speak to the trustee listed on the filing." Wade looked at the screen, looked at the paper, looked up. "Who's the trustee?" The clerk answered. "Margaret Caldwell." That was the moment everything broke, because they knew that name. It was the name on the card they'd found in my bag. And now it was on public record. Dad turned slowly toward Wade. "You said this was simple." Wade snapped back. "How was I supposed to know about a trust?" Dad's voice got colder. "You're a real estate agent. How did you not check the title first?" Wade opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The clerk finally said, "Gentlemen, if there's a disagreement, I'm going to need you to step away from the counter." Margaret, seated in the waiting area, watched them walk out. She never said a word. She didn't need to. Dad called me at 9:22. "What did you do?" he demanded. His voice was tight, breathless, shaking. I could hear traffic behind him. He was still outside the recorder's office. "I accepted what Grandma and Grandpa left me," I said. "That's all. You went behind our backs with some lawyer we've never heard of. Margaret Caldwell has been their trust attorney for 6 years, Dad. You just never asked." Heavy silence. Then he said, "This is my parents' property. I'm their son." And that was the moment I said the hardest thing I've ever said to my father. "They loved you, Dad. But they didn't trust you with it." The silence after that felt enormous. Then he said, "We'll fight this. You can try. But the trust is irrevocable. You don't know what you're talking about." "I do. I've had 3 months to learn." He hung up, no goodbye, just dead air. My hands shook after that, not from fear. From grief. Because the same man who once taught me to ride a bike was now the man who had tried to sell my grandmother's home out from under me. Ridgeline calls a little later, I got another call. A man introduced himself as Carter Briggs from Ridgeline Development. His tone was clipped, polished, irritated. "We have a purchase agreement with Wade T-Main for the Cedar Lake property," he said. "We've just been informed there's a lease pendens on the parcel." "That's correct," I said. "Can you explain the situation?" "My uncle does not own that property," I told him. "He never did. The cabin has been held in an irrevocable trust since 2020. I'm the sole beneficiary." Papers shuffled on the other end. "He represented himself as an heir." "I'm sure he did. But representation isn't ownership." After a pause, Carter asked the question I expected. "Is there any possibility the trust would consider a direct sale?" "The property is not for sale." His voice hardened. "Understood. Then we'll pursue our remedies against Mr. T-Main." Within the hour, Margaret confirmed the trust status to Ridgeline's legal team. Their response was immediate. They were going after Wade for breach of contract. The full penalty clause. Plus damages. Then Margaret called me one more time with something worse. The quitclaim deed Wade tried to file included a notary stamp, she said. The recorder's office checked it. It does not match any active registered notary in the county. I closed my eyes. That's forgery. Yes, she said. It appears so. My uncle had not just tried to steal my property. He had committed a crime doing it. The collapse at home Dad came home around 2 that afternoon looking like a man carrying invisible weight. Mom was already in the kitchen, red-eyed and furious. I was sitting at the dining table. Dad sat across from me and stared at the wood grain for a long time before speaking. I'm going to lose this house, he said flatly. The bank is on me for $180,000. The store is gone. That cabin was supposed to be our way out. I swallowed. I'm sorry you're struggling, Dad. Then help us. The cabin was never your way out. Mom stepped in from the doorway. They were old, Iris. They weren't thinking clearly at the end. I looked at her. They were thinking clearly enough to hire a lawyer 6 years before they died. Dad slammed his palm on the table. I'll contest the trust. At that exact moment, Margaret's voice came through my phone on speaker. I had called her before he got home and left the line open, not to trap him, to save time. Mr. T. Main, she said evenly. Contesting a properly established irrevocable trust executed 6 years before the grantor's deaths, with legal capacity documented and the title already recorded. Would cost you more in legal fees than the property is worth. I strongly advise against it. Nobody moved. Dad looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in my life I saw something in his face I had never seen before, not anger. Recognition. He realized I was no longer the quiet kid at the end of the table. He realized I knew exactly what he had tried to do, and he realized he had lost. Wade falls apart 2 hours later. Wade called the house. Dad answered in the living room, and I heard the entire conversation through the hallway wall. Ridgeline is suing me, Wade said. His voice sounded stripped raw. 45,000 in penalties plus damages. They're saying I committed fraud. Dad answered in a voice colder than I'd ever heard. Did you? I thought we owned it. You're a real estate agent, Wade. You do title searches for a living. How did you not check? I assumed. Dad let that sit there. Then said, you assumed. And Wade, panicking now, blurted, I need a lawyer. Dad replied, so do I. Then came the part that finished it. Dad said, did you forge the notary? Long silence. Then Wade mumbled, I didn't forge it, I just found a stamp. Dad answered, that's still forgery. Then he told Wade not to call the house again until he had spoken to an attorney. That was the moment the alliance between them died. The money was gone, and with it, their loyalty to each other. The consequences over the next 3 weeks, consequences fell one after another like dominoes. Ridgeline filed a civil suit against Wade for breach of contract, fraudulent misrepresentation of title, and damages. The county recorder's office referred the forged notary issue for investigation. Wade's real estate license was suspended pending review. His income stopped. Word spread, because in a small town, public filings travel faster than gossip and turn into gossip almost immediately. By the 2nd week, people at the lake knew. Then people at church knew. Then people in the grocery store knew. Nobody needed every detail. They just needed the headline. Harold T. Main's sons tried to sell his cabin, and his granddaughter stopped them. Wade called me once during that period. His voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. Iris, please, ask your lawyer to withdraw the lease pendants. If the title gets cleared, maybe I can still negotiate with Ridgeline. The lease pendants protects my property, I said. It stays. Then he tried guilt. Your grandparents would be ashamed of you. I let that sit for a second, then I answered quietly. My grandparents are the ones who built this protection. They chose this. They chose me. So no, I don't think shame is what they'd feel. He hung up. I looked at the framed photo of Grandpa on my desk, the one from the summer we fixed the fence. I left it exactly where it was. Dad never contested the trust. Margaret was right. He couldn't afford to. Instead, he sold the building supply store at a loss and worked out a repayment plan with the bank. The house stayed. Barely. Mom went back to work for the first time in 10 years. She got a job at a pharmacy on Lincoln Avenue. When people asked, she said she wanted to stay busy. Nobody believed that, but nobody pushed. Silence, then small repairs, Dad, and I didn't speak for 2 weeks. The house felt haunted by everything unsaid. Then Nora Beckett brought me a warm apple pie one afternoon and set it on my desk. Your parents made their choices, she said, but don't carry their shame for them. That belongs to them. A few days later, Kelsey called me from a friend's house. I don't understand everything that happened, she said softly, but I'm sorry they put you through this. My throat tightened. Thanks, Kels. Then she asked the question only a younger sister would ask. Are you okay? I looked out my bedroom window before answering. I'm getting there. Grandpa's letter in late April, I drove to the cabin alone. Dogwoods were blooming along the road, white and pale pink against the dark water. I unlocked the door with the same key Grandpa had given me when I was 14. In case you ever need to get in when we're not here, he had said. I didn't know then he meant forever the cabin smelled exactly the same. Pine, old books, wood smoke, that faint sweetness in the walls. I walked through every room slowly. The kitchen table Grandpa built. Grandma's bookshelves arranged by color. The little bedroom where she used to read to me. The porch where we watched the lake turn gold. Then, in the desk drawer by the window, I found an envelope with my name on it in Grandpa's handwriting. Margaret had told me it would be there. She had waited until the trust was secure before mentioning it. Inside was one page written in blue ink. His handwriting loosened toward the bottom the way it always did when he got tired. In the letter, he told me he knew his sons would try to sell the cabin. He wrote that he loved Greg. He didn't deny that. But then he wrote the line I have read 100 times since. Greg never understood the difference between something that has value and something that is valuable. Then he wrote why he chose me. Not because I was perfect, not because I was oldest, not because I deserved more, because I was the one who asked whether the roof needed patching before I ever asked what the place was worth. The last line said, "Take care of it. It took care of you first." I sat on the porch and read that letter 3 times, and for the first time since all of this began, I felt something other than fear. I felt anchored. What happened to Wade? A week later, Margaret called with updates. The lease pendants can be withdrawn now, she said. The title is secure and the record will remain clean under the trust. And Wade, he settled with Ridgeline. $45,000 penalty paid through a personal loan. The deal is dead. As for the forged notary, the district attorney's office is still reviewing the referral. He may face charges. His license remains suspended. I sat quietly for a moment. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes. The kind that comes after surviving something you should never have had to survive at all. Then Margaret added one more thing. There's a separate educational fund in the trust documents. Your grandparents earmarked $50,000 specifically for your college expenses. With accrued interest, it's now just over $58,000. I started crying again, because $50,000 was the exact number Dad and Wade had tried to use as bait. The same number my grandparents had quietly set aside for me years earlier. Without strings, without manipulation, without conditions, just love properly documented. Choosing my life that week, I enrolled at Ridgemont Community College, environmental science with a minor in forestry. The campus was 20 minutes from Cedar Lake, closer than my parents' house. When I filled out the housing forms, I wrote the cabin address in the space marked current residence for the first time in my life. Writing an address felt like telling the truth. Later, I asked Mom and Dad to meet me at a coffee shop on Birch Street. Neutral ground. Public. Quiet. No raised voices. When they sat down, Dad was wearing one of Grandpa's old flannels. Mom held her purse close against her side the way she always did when she was anxious. I waited until the coffee came. Then I said, "I love you, both of you. I need you to know that before I say the rest." Mom nodded once. Dad stared at his cup. "The cabin is not for sale," I said. "Not now, not ever. I won't be made to feel guilty for keeping a promise Grandma trusted me to keep." Mom started to speak. "We just wanted what was," I stopped her. Then start by being honest about what happened. You tried to sell something that wasn't yours. You threatened to kick me out. You went through my bag. If we're going to have a relationship after this, it has to be built on respect, not guilt. Not money, not obligation. Dad finally looked up. His voice was rough. I don't know how to fix this. You don't have to fix it today, I said. Then I stood, left enough cash for all 3 coffees, and said, I'll call you Sunday. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a beginning, and sometimes that's all you get. Kelsey comes to the cabin in May. Kelsey showed up at the cabin with a pizza box in her arms and that same oversized hoodie she'd worn for years. I brought lunch, she said. Hope you like pepperoni. We sat on the porch with paper plates on our laps and watched a heron stand motionless in the shallows near the dock. After a while, she said quietly, I didn't know about any of it. I know, then she asked, was I part of the problem? I looked at her. 15 years old, still growing. Still becoming whoever she would eventually be. She hadn't asked to be the favorite. She hadn't chosen any of it. You were a kid, Kelsey, I said. We both were. She nodded and stared out at the water. It's really beautiful here. Grandma used to say that every single time she sat down on that porch. Kelsey glanced at Grandpa's old chair. Can I come back sometimes? Anytime. She leaned her head against my shoulder for a second, then sat back up and grabbed another slice. We didn't talk about lawsuits. We didn't talk about forged stamps or threats or trust law. We talked about her school project. The heron, whether the dock needed new planks before summer. And that was when I realized the cabin hadn't just protected property. It had made room for something better to grow. What I finally understand early June. 6 in the morning. I was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching mist lift off Cedar Lake. The pines stood dark against a pale sky. Somewhere out over the water, a loon called once, then again. And I understood something I hadn't been able to say before. I didn't win against my family. There is no real victory in something like that. You don't win when the people who hurt you are the people who were supposed to protect you. There's no trophy for surviving betrayal. No medal for becoming legally literate fast enough to stop adults from stealing what was never theirs. But I kept a promise. And for the first time in my life, I was standing on something solid. Not because I fought for it alone, but because 2 people loved me enough to plan for the storm before I even saw the clouds. My grandparents couldn't stop my parents from becoming who they were. They couldn't make Dad less desperate. They couldn't make Mom less afraid. They couldn't stop Wade from chasing money that didn't belong to him, but they could make sure I had ground to stand on. Literally, I think about Grandpa's letter a lot, about the difference between something that has value and something that is valuable. The cabin has both, but only one of those can be measured. And my family spent years focused on the wrong one. So if you're listening to this and you feel like nobody, in your corner, I want you to hear me when I say this. Sometimes the people who protect you are not the people standing in front of you. Sometimes they made plans for you years ago, quietly, carefully, out of love, and sometimes all you have to do is show up, sign the paper, and keep the promise. Peace doesn't come from revenge. It comes from standing on something real and knowing no one gets to take it from you. That's my story. If it made you feel something, anger, relief, hope, or even just a little less alone, then it did what I hoped it would do. So let me ask you this. If you could protect one thing in your life, a place, a person, or a promise, what would it be? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you here for the next one.